Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. I'm Joey, and today Jennifer and I will be doing our new monthly tradition of a reading wrap up to discuss the stories that we read for the month of April and answer some questions. What did we love? What did we not love as much? And stuff like that. So, just to give everyone context, we have read four stories this month in the month of April. The Lady in the Looking Glass by Virginia Woolf, Happy Endings by Margaret Atwood, A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner, and Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway. Jennifer, why don't you start by telling us which of these was your favorite of the month and why is it a favorite? Why did it stand out?
Okay, Joey, I never follow the rules, as you know, so I'm not
Mhm.
going to do it this time either. What I would like to say is, as I was listening to you list off the four stories that we read in April, I was like, wow, we really hit some very, very huge authors, very important stories. And I was just impressed with the amount of conversation we've had on these stories. And as I was thinking about what was my favorite story to discuss with you during the podcast, I would have to say it was dun dun dun. We're going to go with Margaret Atwood's very, very short story, Happy Endings.
Okay, so why? I mean, I knew that
I,
was going to be your favorite one, but to everyone
I,
listening.
yes, because you've broke me of the habit of like I have a four-way tie for first place, and you said that's really not
Hmm.
the point of the exercise.
Yeah, all of them can't be your
All
favorite.
of them are
Yeah.
my favorite for different reasons. And Happy Endings, I think, was my favorite because there was the most humor in it out of all of the stories that we had read in April. We discussed a lot of really heavy, dark themes about identity and agency and creepy people who sleep with dead guys. Like there was just a lot.
Hmm.
There was a lot going on. And so for me, the straightforwardness of Margaret Atwood's story, of the ability to weave a better story as you add more complications, I really loved what she was doing there with us. And it's like, oh, we co-created the story because we made up most of the details in that story.
That's true. It was an interactive read. My favorite one was not the Margaret Atwood one, although I do like it. Mine was The Lady in the Looking Glass by Virginia Woolf, which, if anyone has been listening lately, I'm now a Virginia Woolf fan, so this should not be odd or come as a surprise. It's funny that on this podcast in real time, I went from a Virginia Woolf, I wouldn't say hater, but I wasn't with her, but now I am a Virginia Woolf stan, as the kids would like to say. And I'm a kid, so I can say that. I really loved it because I have found that I really enjoy, and this is something that you have talked about too, Jennifer, just talking about like why you love Virginia Woolf is it's first of all it's a very sensory experience no matter what we have read or why either like on our own or together now. She has just this we not weird, it's just very unique way of observing the world that was around her at the time, and it just makes me kind of look around in my real day in real time and just like kind of be like, well, what would Virginia Woolf think of this? And it also a recurring item that comes up in a lot of her work, which I have thought about a lot recently because we've been reading so much of her, is looking glasses or mirrors, if you want to. maybe maybe British people say looking glasses. I don't think so. I think they still say mirror, but that comes up a lot in her work. There's usually a looking glass or a mirror somewhere in there. I really enjoy all of her writing, and I think the negative side of all of us reading all of these great works of literature are that it really makes it impossible to read crappy books and stories and be like, I don't care for this. I don't want to read it anymore.
Palette for reading has definitely been refined, and I'm having a Virginia Woolf moment right now. I have a bouquet of flowers and I have a hyacinth and it is pink and then there's tulips and daffodils and it's very springy and the entire room is suffused with the smell of a hyacinth. And if you've ever smelled
Mm.
one, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I was like, "Oh, this feels like I'm living a scene in one of Virginia Woolf's books because she's always drawing our attention to the sights, the smells, the feeling, the sensation. Luckily, there is no bee buzzing around the room, but that is something that often shows up in her prose.
A lot of the natural world is described, especially since we are going to be reading, wink, wink.
Yes, we
We're
are.
going to be reading The Waves by Virginia Woolf, which is often noted as her masterpiece of all of her works. So we're very excited to read that in the future one day.
We certainly are. May is going to be an amazing month for us.
Yes.
And I do appreciate, Joey, that you acknowledge when we started this podcast, you're like, and this is a quote from you, I just don't get it. I don't get her. We are not the
Oh
same.
yeah, yeah.
Or words to that effect. And I appreciated watching that evolution of thought and experience. And it was a nice reminder because I have said those things to you about authors you've brought to me. And I was like, Joey, this person isn't for me. And you're like, just try it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this might really be for me. So a nice
Hmm.
reminder to ourselves and to those who might be listening that you never really know. You never really know until you've given it more than one effort. Because, Joey, when I was thinking about our conversation that we had in April about Happy Endings by Margaret Atwood, one of the quotes that made me chuckle when I was thinking back about our conversation, you're like, oh, come on, Margaret Atwood. What if this was the first thing anyone ever, read from you? Do you
Hmm.
really want this to be representative of your work? And I'm like, it sounds just like Margaret Atwood. And you're like, no, it does not. And I think we had a little bit of a debate about that. For
Hmm.
me, her focus on feminism and sexism and environmentalism and power dynamics and all the things she always seems to weave into her novels jam-packed themselves into that very, very brief story of happy endings. But I did have to side with you that if that had been the only thing I ever read by Margaret Atwood, I think I would be missing out. It's like only eating a peanut butter
Yeah.
sandwich your whole life, and then somebody offers you something different. You're like, where have you been my whole life? I thought that was the only food we were allowed to eat.
Yeah, I stand by that because I think I love that story and it's obviously studied with widely studied because it's a good story. It's an excellent story and it deserves the scholarship it gets. But I do think that yeah, if you had no context about Margaret Atwood, you had never heard of The Handmaid's Tale, don't know where you live, maybe you've never heard of it. Or I mean, you probably have seen the show or you've heard about the show, but the show is so different than the I almost said the podcast than the book. And I actually prefer the book over the show. I haven't actually watched the whole show, so maybe I shouldn't say it. But yeah, I do think it's a great story and it's an easy read, but you don't get the full context of who Margaret Atwood is as a writer if that's your first and only thing that you've read. If you've read something else and then you'd be like, "Oh, I get it." Okay. But if you read that and then you leave Margaret Atwood alone forever, you're gonna be like, I don't know who this person is, but she can't write a story, obviously. She left out all the good bits.
Joey, and it's funny that you'd say that because it was one of the things that you brought up to my attention is that it's well studied. And as I was thinking that, I'm like, why? I'm like, this is a perfect teaching tool. We were dissecting that story saying, okay, story A, pretty boring. Story B, she brought in some complication and a little bit of strife. Now we're interested. And she just built on the complexities of story building. So I could really sink my teeth into the idea that this was something in a college course by a famous author saying, hey, do you want to know how to write a story? Here are some ways that you could approach it. And it
Hmm.
was, as we discussed in our podcast, it was a meta story. It was meta fictional. We
Yeah.
were definitely talking about the beauty of story writing and what stories are about. And Joey, when I was thinking about preparing for our conversation today, what was the theme? Did we have just one theme that we were going for in April? And I couldn't narrow it down to one theme, but what was super obvious to me as I was re listening to our podcast in each and every episode in April, because we were dealing with very well known and established members of the literary canon, we did a very extensive job of talking about their history, about their style, about how they write. You threw out a lot of interesting literary terms for those of us who are still working on our literary vocabulary. And I think that was something that was really very interesting about the month of April for us.
Yeah, I guess that it is. I was trying to think like, do we? Because sometimes obviously we do follow a theme. We're like, oh, we're gonna follow this thread of whatever we were most interested at the moment. But yeah, I think this is just like big names in literature. Uh,
Marquee, marquee writers, they are
yeah,
definitely people that will be recognized by the average Joe or
yeah.
Joey.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's a good idea that we did that as well, even though it was kind of accidental, I guess, because these are such well-known authors, as you said, so they could be a little intimidating, especially people like Virginia Woolf and William Faulkner, who are obviously both modernist writers, and their work feels kind of harder to understand. But these were extremely simple. They're not simple stories. Let me rephrase that. They're very easy to understand and you can follow along. Maybe a little less than Virginia Woolf. It gets a little a little odd and a little harder to follow, but William Faulkner certainly his body of work can be very challenging in his full-length novels, but A Rose for Emily is like just a regular story. It goes from A to B and there's a plot and you can follow along and you know who the characters are and who's speaking. He tells you who's speaking and he tells you exactly what's happening. And in that episode, I think I read the opening paragraph from The Sound and the Fury to give some context in as to how Faulkner shows up in other parts of his oeuvres. The so still read it. Read all these stories. They're all good.
But
Okay,
it is
move.
a
Go
great,
ahead.
sorry, Joey, it is a great starting point
Mm-hmm.
for William Faulkner because definitely placing us in The Sound and the Fury, I'm like, "Ugh, that was a tough read. However, the A Rose for Emily was very straightforward. You did get a twist. You did get the beauty of his writing style. And I
Mm-hmm.
think one thing that just as we are reviewing these authors that was very obvious is that they each have such a unique, identifiable from 100 yards. You're like, I feel that this is a Hemingway story. I feel that this is a Virginia Woolf story. I think this is Faulkner. I think it's very easy to see their blueprint of how they approach storytelling.
Yeah, that's true. Each of these authors has a very strong authorial voice. So there's no confusing. You're not like, oh, was this Ernest Hemingway or Virginia Woolf? You know the difference there. One's economical prose and one's purple prose. So okay, good point. That's our theme. That was our theme was heavy hitters.
Literary greats.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Did you have any unexpected disappointments or surprising favorites this month?
I don't think there were any disappointments with the stories that we read. I
Hmm.
think the challenge for me is that they were so different in their storytelling styles, but also so effective. And as you mentioned earlier, thinking about, oh, if Ernest Hemingway was observing the scene, what would he notice? Oh, if William Faulkner was narrating this scene, what would he focus on? And
Hmm.
I think the challenge for me is to not try to rewrite the story, to try to just appreciate the story as the story is presented. And so I don't think I had any disappointments. I do have a moment, I do recall a moment in our podcast of talking about A Rose for Emily where I missed an important plot point. So that was probably a personal disappointment of like, how did I miss that? But it's also one of those moments of there's always an opportunity through discussion to learn something new about the story that you may have overlooked or had a different opinion. So I think if I had to say what was a story that really made me think a little bit deeper about my own interaction with the text, it would be A Rose for Emily. Because as I had noted, I didn't read anything about the story before. So that ending and what it was actually about, big shocker for me. And I was a little grossed out by it. Won't lie.
Yeah. Yeah, it is gross. Also didn't have any disappointments. Hard to be disappointed with that list of authors. But my unexpected surprise is also a Rose for Emily's ending. Because even though I had read it before, I forgot that was the ending. And I did not see it coming. And I like audibly laughed out loud. Like not laughed like, oh my God, this is so funny, but like, oh my God, that's so disgusting. So yeah, that was a great ending. And if you have not read it and you haven't listened to our podcast, I guess we won't spoil it. Just read it. It's very short, as all of our short stories that we read are typically. Sometimes we read a little bit longer ones. But that one's pretty short, so you should just read it. But if you would like to read it, plug, go to extraliteraryfairs.com and go check out our story section, because every story that we have read so far, since we have rebranded to the Extra Literary Affairs brand name, we have a running list. So you'll see the opening paragraph, a little image of the story, a button that says read the short story, read the story. Just click that and it'll bring you to a PDF that's free that I found online. So I'm not stealing it or pirating it. If somebody else did, I guess that's on them. I'm just giving you the link. A song that one of us, these stories made us think of a song, and we put that in from Spotify. If I did it, it makes me laugh, and that's why I put it in there. And then a little section about why we loved it. And if we ever hate a story one day, then it will say why we hate it. But yeah, go to extraliteraryyfairs.com.
Very comprehensive, and you're making it as straightforward and as easy as possible to join in with the fun. Read these stories. See if anything sparks in your imagination as a result of our discussion and your own experience reading it. So, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited for people to do that.
And you can leave us comments on our website on the stories pages. So read it and then give us your review. Next question. Which character or scene stuck with you the most and why? I have a feeling we're probably going to say the same thing right now.
No, Joey, I wanted to go far afield. So I
Okay.
was like, okay, so what scene? It's a very minor character, but for me, it was very important. And it was in Hills Like White Elephants. It was
Mm-hmm.
the female bartender who interceded on behalf of Jig when her boyfriend was being his obnoxious self and she needed to intervene. So I just really thought a lot after we read the story about what was that bartender's experience? What was she seeing? What was her motivation to do that? Was she being an advocate for Jig, or was she just trying to keep peace in the bar? There's just all of these, as we talked about in Ernest Hemingway stories. Nobody knows anything. You can make up any story about any character because he gave you so few clues to go on that I'm like, I created a whole story for who this woman was and why she interceded on Jig's behalf. And she was definitely,
Mm-hmm.
for me, the hero of the story of like, enough. Stop talking, dude.
Yeah. She says it like, please, 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 like 7 times or something.
7 times. And that was one of my favorite memorable moments that I often throw out in my personal life to people. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to tell you the scene. And if I have to tell you, please, 7 times to please stop talking, I think we've got a problem here. And Joey, I just re listened to our podcast just to refresh my memory on the things that we had talked about. And what was so funny to me about that is he's asking her to get an abortion, right? This is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, I'll do anything you want. I just want to keep you happy. And the one thing, literally the one thing she asked him for was to please stop talking about this topic in this train station. And denied. I'm not going to stop talking about it. I'm still going to keep going. And I thought, really, isn't that an interesting isn't that an interesting perspective on how their relationship goes? Like, I'm just going to ask you for this teeny tiny little thing, which is called getting an abortion and changing the whole course of your future. No big deal. Or she's going to ask him, I'm going to ask you this really teeny tiny little favor of just stop talking. And he's like, absolutely not. I just can't do that. I've got to keep going. I have to push my agenda forward. I'm like, very interesting, people.
I'm gonna change my answer because it was going to be a roast for Emily, but I don't want to spoil it. And in order to give the scene, I would have to then spoil it. So I'm gonna change it to the other thing that has stuck with me, which is in Happy Endings. Although it was not my favorite of the month, I still enjoy it, as I said. But the thing that stuck out to me was the whole point of the story. Well, I guess it depends on what you're reading it, how you're reading it. But to me, the whole point of the story was everyone's always going to die in the end. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how long the story goes on for, how short. Even if it happens off page, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen to all of us, even characters. Okay, unless they're like an immortal god or whatever, then it's different. But typically, if it's grounded in reality, it's going to end in death. And I think that has really stuck with me, not because I didn't know about that. I I certainly did understand that mortality is a thing, but it is a sort of a sobering thought about stories. Like I said, especially if it doesn't even happen on page, which is sometimes you're like, oh my God. I have cried many a time over a character that has died in a story, and I'm not ashamed about that. There is actually the worst time that ever happened. This has almost nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but I'm gonna tell it anyway. Is that there's this anime called Attack on Titan, and if you know, you guys, you know, okay. In one of the final scenes, in one of the final episodes, a really important character dies in like the most heroic way, and the next day, I literally felt like I was in mourning for that character. Like
Oh.
I was grieving for the loss of them. I love them so much. But anyway, everyone dies in the end, and is that a happy ending? I don't know. You tell us. That's the part of that's the fun of that story, as we were saying, is that you get to write, you get to put your imagination into that story, which is very fun.
And Joy, I love what you just said. Even though this is not an experience that we've had together with this anime series, I that's not my jam. But I love
Could
that
be.
it could be. It's not my jam yet. I have to remind myself it's not
Yes.
your jam yet. Don't say no until you know it's not for you. That it evokes the power of literature, of experience, of this empathy building. The fact that
Hmm.
you, as an adult, watched this and had a profound emotional experience that lingered with you for more than 24 hours, that you're not afraid to say, this changed me. Like this experience left a mark. And that I
Hmm.
think if somebody asks me, why do you read? I'm like, I'm reading to have 100 lifetimes. I want to see into everyone else's life and experience all these other things that may not ever be my lived experience, but I get to vicariously have that experience. So I'm immortal in that way because I have an endless number of lives that I can explore.
Exactly. And we talk about that a lot, that the one of the biggest benefits of reading anything, but particularly the things that we're reading, so read what we're reading, is that you gain so much empathy for other people that your lived experience will never be the same. Like the Hills Like White Elephants is a good example because the girl who's unnamed, and she's only called the girl, that's why I'm calling her that. To anyone that doesn't is like, why are you calling her that? I'll never have that same experience. I'll never be in I think they're in Spain, right? They're in
Yes,
Spain.
they
Okay, they're
are.
in Spain. I'll never be in Spain with this rando American dude asking me to have an abortion. That will never be my lived experience, but I can learn empathy through this story. I mean, if you know people, you should talk to them, but if you can't, this is the second best way to go about it.
Hey,
But
Joey,
yeah,
you know,
good
a
point.
great way to get to know people, talk to them about the books you're reading. That's a nice way to an entry.
Yeah.
Like, hey, how
Hills
do you
Like White
feel about this?
Elephants might be a hard
That would be
intro.
tough. Unless you're drinking. If you're at a bar and all you do is drink and look at things, which was one of the themes
Oh,
of that
perfect.
that
Yeah.
particular thing is like, hey, I have the perfect story for bar book club. You just go, you sit, you drink a bunch of beers, and you talk about books set in bars.
Yeah. If you ever meet one of us in a bar, ask us what kind of short story you should read. We have a long, a
You
long
have a
list now
long
of
list.
suggestions. Okay, next question. What story next month are you most excited to read?
This is going to be an easy one for me. I cannot wait to read The Waves and swim around in some beautiful, beautiful language with Virginia Woolf. And you did inspire me, Joey. I know I was on Team Virginia Woolf before, I don't know, before you were born, maybe not quite, before you were a born again Virginia lover, let's just say
Yeah.
that I have read several of her novels, but not recently and not
Mhm.
in the succession that you have done your unfolding of her whole literary career. And I really was inspired to say, maybe I should start at the beginning and watch the evolution of how she became the person that I loved in Mrs. Dalloway with my first experience for her. So, Joey, I just wanted to acknowledge even when you love a particular author, there's probably always another lens, always another way to look at them that will expand your understanding of who they are and what they were up to in their writing.
Yeah, I haven't read it exactly like that because I haven't read all of her stuff yet, but even if I did now, it wouldn't matter because I definitely didn't follow publication date. But It is interesting to follow, and we talked about. I think that we said that about William Faulkner too. Like we should see if his evolution happens like that, because A Rose for Emily is so different compared to As I Lay Dying or The Sound and the Fury. But yeah, it's interesting to see that evolution unfold, especially with Virginia Woolf. But the only thing that I think would be a negative experience is that you'd be like, oh man, you're gonna be so good in the future. I just want to read those things. Like I read Jacob's Room, which is one of her earlier works, and I was like, I see where this is headed, honey, but like I'm not loving it quite as much as I love To the Lighthouse or Mrs. Dalloway
Orlando.
or Orlando. Yes, exactly. Thank you. I was trying to think of what other one.
Yeah, I'm like, Joey, I know you love it. It's not even that you secretly love it. And you use a phrase which always makes me smile. I was like, oh, I love that for you, right? You say that often. And I was like, you, in my mind, as you're reading this Virginia Woolf early work, and you're like, I love this for you because someday you're going to be even better. And so I can imagine that in my head, and will probably do so if I read Jacob's Room or one of her earlier works.
Yeah, I'm still gonna read them, but I'm definitely gonna be like, oh, I wish it was like your later part of your career because I like that better. But maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe she was very intentional with Jacob's Room and it was supposed to be written exactly the way it was. She was obviously a genius. It's not like she did it because she just like wasn't smart enough to do it. Maybe I haven't read enough of her earlier work to give that an honest opinion. I don't have an opinion yet
And the
on that.
only thing I'm sorry, Joey, the only thing I'm worried about is that The Waves is the first novel we have read together. And so that is a big commitment. So that is the only thing that I am a little bit hesitant on. I think savoring Virginia Woolf instead of devouring her down in one sitting, which some of our things we can definitely sit down and, read a story 4 times in one day and be like, I've got it. I
Mm.
think my experience with Virginia Woolf, even in The Woman in the Looking or The Lady in the Looking Glass, I definitely needed to take some time, put some space in there, let a couple days pass, and revisit it. So I'm really curious how that experience will be for us reading The Waves. So, what story in May are you most looking forward to reading?
The Waves is going to be fun, but The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu, it's an amazing story and I absolutely love it. And I absolutely need to read Ken Liu's fantasy quartet, or maybe it's a trilogy. I think it's a quartet. Don't remember. But the dandelion something. I can imagine the cover. I think it's something with a dandelion on it and like a helmet, like a knight's helmet or something. But I really want to read more of his work. I actually haven't. I've only read the Paper Menagerie story. Like that's the titular story of that collection. And for whatever reason, even though I absolutely love it, talk about a story that makes me cry. I have not read. I've been neglectful of Ken Liu. I'm so sorry, Ken Liu. If you're listening, that would be super cool. Ken Liu, hit me up. But so sorry about that because you're a genius and I absolutely adore
Yes.
you.
Yeah, and we are definitely, Joey, I appreciate that we are reading short stories out of collections and we are falling in love with new writers. And we keep saying this to ourselves, and I know we're going to have time in the future to do this. We're going to revisit some of our favorite new authors that we have discovered because their short story collections are so rich with opportunities to explore their work even further.
We just read so many short stories, so I do a lot of outside short story reading as well to figure out like what would I be interested in, but I'm gonna add him to the list. He will reappear. He will not only be the Paper Menagerie story. We will have other ones. Okay. So our last question is, outside of our podcast, what are some stories or books you are hoping to read? And I guess I know what I'm going to add to this list that I just made.
And Joey, I was laughing about that because I'm like, who has time to read outside of our podcast? Well, I am, and I know, please do not roll your eyes, Joey. I know this is coming. I am going to do an event in June, which I know we're talking about May, but I am going to hopefully go in person to a Bloomsday reading of Ulysses out loud near
Oh my
Philadelphia
God, how
in
long is
June.
that?
So they're only going to do it for 8 hours. So I'm apparently going
Um,
to get it. But the thing that I love about that idea is that they're going to let members of the audience read aloud from Ulysses. So I will not be participating in that, but I thought, I enjoyed the process of reading Ulysses in some ways, and we reference it a lot. So I'm like, maybe I'll just
Mm.
read a chapter or two before June. So that is going to be my May reading assignment for myself of just cracking open Ulysses. And the thing that I promised to do today is the last day of April. I am not afraid to say that I always revisit the year of the flood in April. And I'm like, oh no, I ran out of time. So hopefully I will be able to enjoy Margaret Atwood's The Year of the Flood before the next time we get together to do a recap because it is a perennial favorite.
Yeah, you do love that one. That's also on my list, not The Year of the Flood, because I have read that, but Mad Adam, which I also was like, oh, I'm going to read it because you always read The Year of the Flood for Earth Day in April. And then I was like, oh, well, I just have to finish this trilogy. I didn't do that. So I will have to push that to May. Also, today's the last day of April, right?
It is.
It's gonna be May. If you're a millennial, you know that's NSYNC, that's Justin Timberlake, okay? Remember I was telling you about that? Okay?
I
That's a
do.
thing.
I do,
Millennials
Joey.
love that. It's catnip to us.
I I love that for you. As you would say
Yeah.
to me, I love that for you. I'm so happy that
Oh
you
yeah.
can share that with your millennial friends.
So funny. Okay, anyway, so I'm gonna read Mad Adam, hopefully. Currently, I'm reading the first half of the duology, a duology by N.K. Jemisin, who is also we love her on this channel as well. It's called The Killing Moon. I don't remember what the duology is called now because I forgot to write that down. But that's the first half of the duology, and of course, it's great so far. It's N.K. Jemisin's writing is just like you just want to keep going. You're just like, I can't stop. I just have to keep reading this. So hopefully I get over my reading slump that's Monsieur Alexandre Dumas put me in with
He
the Three
did. I
Musketeers.
do
That
remember
son of a bitch.
the agony of the Three Musketeers month. I do remember that,
It
Joey.
really,
So
to all fellow readers who I don't know why you would listen to this if you weren't a reader, but whatever, maybe you just like her personalities. But any reader who is like, oh my God, and I didn't even hate the Three Musketeers either. It just put me in a reading slump. But sometimes you read something, you're like, no, I hate reading now. I hate reading. I never want to read again. And that did it for me. And I was also trying to read a thriller, which I don't typically read those, called The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. No. Mm-mm. Nope. If we have the same reading taste, don't read that. It's even like on a sentence level. No, no, it's not good. It's objectively poorly written. Sorry. And I tried to pull a quote, but I have an ebook version and it would not load. And I was like, "You're doing this to me on purpose because you don't want me to drag you
it's
through the
like, please
mud."
don't bash my book. Please, 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 Joey, don't bash my book.
Yeah.
And I think what is very interesting about that is that I remember when you told me like, oh, I'm reading The Three Musketeers, and in the beginning you were really into it, and you're like, in my mind, this is my interpretation of what I heard from you. It's a dude's book. They go on these adventures, they do a lot of dumb things, and I was like, Joey, nothing
Mm.
about this book makes me want to read it. And then you're like, it was 400 pages, something. It was a very long
It
book.
was 555
I
pages,
didn't
my
want to say
version.
500 because that
It
seemed
was is.
obscene
No,
that
yeah,
that
it
could be
is
that long. And
obscene.
I was like, oh my gosh, Joey. So I appreciate that. So the one thing that I do want to get to that is within my grasp, I will say, perhaps I don't get to read an entire novel in the month of May because of other obligations. I have so many of these beautiful issues of Harper's, The Atlantic, The New Yorker. Picking them up and reading the fiction in there is such an indulgence for me. So I am very excited that perhaps I will find some stories for us to discuss that are contemporarily out in the public sphere. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, and we have been reading from Granada Magazine a few times now, and we will be reading from the Paris Review, which feels very fancy.
For the benefit of the listening audience, can we go through the stories that we plan on reading and discussing in the month of May?
Oh, sure. Okay, so this month of May, the May of
The May of May?
the month of May, because it's of course gonna be May. We're gonna be reading first The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu, The Umbrella by Tove Ditlevsen, Two Sisters by Ludmila Petrushevskaya, and then we're finishing off the month by reading The Waves by Virginia Woolf.
That is a really exciting and very potpourri group of writers. I'm just really excited, Joey, that we have
Just
such an
excited.
assortment of authors to explore. And I would say three of them are new to me. So I am very much enjoying our adventurous reading into authors I have not read. And hopefully, it gives our audience members a little bit of solace that even if you think you're well read, there's always someone new that you haven't heard of that's going to pop out of the woodwork and you'll be like, oh, guess who my new favorite is this week? And so that has been a really rewarding part of this project, Joey. So thank you for your part in pulling that together for us.